Welcome to CERT Rodeo in a Box, a training module to help you better respond as a CERT volunteer. During an emergency, it is likely that you will encounter someone with functional or access needs. This population may require special assistance to help them successfully navigate a disaster situation. The following presentations have been excerpted from our own CERT Rodeo. They will provide you with first-hand accounts from members of the functional and access needs community and how to best assist them. Your own dialogue and discussion will help you further address the needs of these populations and how your CERT team should respond.
Hello, my name is Craig Martin, and on this part of the video we're going to discuss functional and access needs for blind and visually impaired individuals before, during, and after a disaster. And basically we're going to talk about how we communicate with them, how we approach them, and how we go through the process of helping them. I've been blind since birth and have worked with emergency management folks for some time in various organizations, and working with CERT here and working with their team to be able to give them assistance during a possible disaster scenario. We'll be describing some of the terms used and some of the things that you can do, and we'll try to set you a little bit more at ease when dealing with the blind and visually impaired. Beginning your situation assessment. You're in the situation, you come face to face with somebody who's blind and visually impaired, but you don't know it yet. As you encounter individuals, don't assume that you can tell what their functional access needs are. They may not appear to have one. So you want to go ahead and, make no assumptions, and you won't know. You can't always tell by looking, so don't make any assumptions. Just approach them normally, because they feel more at ease when you do that. Be aware that individuals may have more than one functional and access need. They may be blind. They also may have other disabilities, developmental or mental or physical. So individuals that are hurt, scared, confused, or other types of mental conditions may not tell you that they have a disability. And that's true with blindness or any other type of disability that's not obvious. So your disaster psychology would come in here. Communication is a two-way street, but most important, we want to listen. Okay? Explain the disaster as you know it. Okay? And as well as asking for information about the individual. And I often used to tell my students, we have one mouth and how many ears? We have two. Okay? So we want to listen a lot. In fact, we want to try to listen as we talk. So you're going to try to get a lot of information in a short time, because you're in the first parts of the disaster and you're trying to get them safe, or make sure that they're safe. Our next section, people are people. People with functional access needs are basically to be treated like others, except when dealing with the need that they have. Treat them like everybody else as best you can. Some people will appreciate what you do for them, others will be not so appreciative, and sometimes that occurs because the environment has changed, they're frightened, they're confused, they have no understanding of what's going on, and that frightens them. They only know that something has changed. You've approached the door and you're strange, and there's not much that they understand yet. So Be prepared for any emotional reaction. Some people are more stressed than others. That's another factor. And there are any number of human behaviors you're going to see. Visually impaired and blind people are no exception to that. They're humans, so they're going to exhibit many of the same behaviors. How many people were at Joplin? What did you find? You found that people acted in many different ways once you were dealing with a disaster. They may be different before a disaster, and during a disaster, they may behave another way, and then after the disaster, still another. So you just want to be aware that your psychology training applies here to functional and access needs situations. We're going to talk about your dignity for a bit. Don't allow anybody to touch you inappropriately. Don't let them make you feel uncomfortable. Don't let them make you feel intimidated. You're human just like they are, and you're trying to help them, but it doesn't mean that they can take license. If it would not be acceptable to, you in normal life, it's probably not acceptable in the disaster. People deserve dignity. The 3 C's is our next section. Courtesy, compassion, and care. You want to make sure that you exhibit all of those. All individuals, whether they have a functional and access need or not, deserve the 3 C's listed above. And I'll give them to you again. Courtesy, compassion, and care. Everyone has a right to dignity. You do. They do. It's the same. People deserve dignity in a disaster and out of it. We don't expect you to be perfect. You won't always get it right. You can't know everybody. So I want to encourage you, do your best. We want your heart to be in the right place. And that's true with any individual, whether they have a functional access need or not. Just do your best. We don't expect you to be perfect. We know that you have training that teaches you to do certain things, and those things are what you do. Anything beyond that, we don't expect. Just make sure your heart's in the right place. Someone tells you they can't see. If they tell you they can't see, ask them if they're blind, or if it's a result of something that happened to them during the disaster. Maybe they're hurt. Maybe they're in pain. So start asking them questions and listen to them carefully. If it is a result of an injury, refer to your disaster medical training. You can also, when you're talking to them, do a quick visual medical assessment. That is not an assessment for the disability to look for it. It is a medical assessment only. And if you see something, you can offer to help. Don't be afraid to do that. In that case, when it comes to medicine, you're treating them pretty much like you would anybody else. If it is because they are blind or low vision, the following may help you assist them. Blind and low vision assistive devices. There's adaptive technologies for blind and low vision people. There are white canes, guide dogs. That's not necessarily technology, but they are assistive, individuals, we'll call them. They're a service dog, and they're working. We want to make sure that we don't handle the dog. That's something that the handler or the blind person or low vision person is responsible to do. The dog may or may not be wearing his working harness, so be aware of that. Going on, anti-glare sunglasses for visually impaired folks, people that have some vision. Items for blind people who have diabetes. We're talking about glucose monitors, things like that they may need. Okay, those are some of the assistive technology devices that you can run into. Assessing the individual. If someone is unconscious, the presence of the aforementioned devices may give you a clue as to how to deal with them later if they regain consciousness. It may also tell you about the functional and access need that they have. So, observe, look around you, see what's around. If they're injured, as I said before, treat them like you would anybody else, because this is your medical training coming into play. Determine if the individual can safely shelter in place or needs to be moved somewhere else. Ask them too, if you see that there's substantial damage outside, you can ask them if you can go inside to help them. Our next section, sheltering in place. Sometimes one of the directives may be that they need to shelter in place. Explain the condition of their environment as you see it. Actions that you take, turning off the gas, turning off the water if it's not working, things like that. If there are any public directives, explain those. Maybe the power's off and they haven't turned on the radio yet. Maybe they're confused and they haven't done it because they're not thinking normally. So explain those directives. Boil orders, decontamination, that kind of thing. Debris removal, power lines down. Explain all of that. And explain what you all did to help them. The next section, evacuation. If you have to evacuate somebody who's totally blind or partially sighted, you explain the disaster that happened and why you need to move them. And you want to do that in as timely a manner as you can. They obviously are in an unsafe environment, so you want to move them. If they refuse, you leave them alone. That's something that is done. If they're not willing to move, then the other city officials will have to deal with them. If time is of the essence, explain the immediate threat, okay? Do not put yourself in danger. Don't go into the house if you see that it's a problem. If you have time and it is safe to do so, remind the individual of common items that they need to take. Extra clothes, medicines. If they happen to be diabetic, maybe occasional foods that will help regulate their sugar, that kind of thing. Assistive technologies, as we covered before. Ask them if you can assist them. And if they decline and ask you to wait, and this is important, specify a time limit before you have to leave them. You can't spend all day at one location. You have a lot of people to help. So specify a time limit, and if they exceed the time limit, you have to move on. And tell them, make sure they understand that. And you don't have to feel guilty that you have to do that. You can't spend time with one person. In other words, but you also, again, want to make sure that you invoke those 3 C's, courtesy, compassion, and care. It's a balancing act, and it's tough, but we can do it. Our next section, sighted guide basics. What is sighted guide? The gentleman that came up with me, I've learned a little about sighted guide. Ask the individual if they would like to take your arm, okay? Or suggest where they may hold on to you for your freedom of movement and comfort. Again, they need to be appropriate about that. Dignified. No inappropriate touching. Give directions such as stepping down, stepping up, opening a door. If there's debris in the area, tell them about that you're going to go around it, or that you may have to step over it because there's nowhere else to go. Walk at a normal pace for the environment. If you're walking through debris, you're going to go a little slower. If it's wide open, you walk normally. And they have the right to ask you to walk slower or faster, depending upon their walking ability. Describe the environment to the person as you're leading them. Okay? You don't have to go into exhaustive detail. There's a limb. You don't have to say that it's an oak limb or anything like that. There's a limb. We're going to go around it. That kind of thing. That way you're able to stay up with what we're coming up against there. You're in a triage or shelter area, and you're responsible for the individual. Announce people coming and going only if it affects what you're doing with them. Don't need to hear about everybody coming and going. They'll hear that, or they'll see it. If you know you're entering a blind person's personal space, announce your presence. That's true with anybody. If you're coming up behind that person and they don't see you because they have a very narrow field of view, or they're looking off somewhere else, this is true with anybody. Announce who you are. Announce that you're there. They're already, shaken up by the disaster. You don't want to scare them. And things will scare them more in disasters than not, possibly. Some people it won't, but there are those that it might. So, announce when you leave. That's a courtesy. Okay, our next section, some do's. Talk to the person directly. When you approach them, first off, you may speak a little bit loud because you don't know if they might have a slight hearing loss. But once you see that they hear you, then you can speak normally to them. Ask questions. If you're unsure about something, don't assume. In other words, you don't know what the functional access need is, then don't assume anything. Just ask. Use normal language and wording like see, watch, and look while guiding. That's normal. An example would be you watch for falling limbs. That's normal, and they'll do that. Tell them the weather conditions so they can dress appropriately. That's important. The temperature has dropped because the cold front has come in after the storm, and it's 40 degrees. You want to make sure they've got a jacket on. Point out directions clearly, like right or left. I wouldn't use north or south. The environment may have changed, and if you're leading them to triage or shelter, may not be very good at directions. Clear a path through minor debris, such as broken glass, small limbs. Emphasize small. If it's big, try to go around it or get help to clear it so you can get them through there. If it is safe to do so, then you clear the debris. If it's not, leave it alone. Power lines, obviously, try to get them away from power lines. You don't know if they're live or not. Okay? Our next section, some don'ts. Here we go. Dignity. What's the first thing on this slide? Don't touch anybody without asking them. Notice I didn't say blind or sighted people. Anybody. Can't emphasize it enough. Don't touch them unless you ask. Don't assume a blind person is deaf. and that you have to talk loud after your first approach. Okay? You want to make sure that you talk to them in a dignified manner. As you talk to them, it'll become more natural, and you'll do that. So don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. Don't tell them to count their steps. Don't count steps for them. It's just inappropriate for one thing, and it's tedious in another, and you're already in a disaster, and it's more trouble than it's worth. So just don't count steps. As I said before, don't give directions like north, south, etc. to a lot of blind people because of the environment change. Don't leave them without telling them you have to go. It's very embarrassing to blind people to ask you a question and you've left. So don't do that. Don't leave without explaining the current situation that makes you leave, the reason you have to leave. So that's important also. And if you can, explain how long you'll be gone, or that someone else will take over your duties and who they are if you know them. If you don't know their name, explain the position that they hold, or ask that person when you bring them to introduce them.
Hello, I'm Brian McMillan, and I'm here to speak with you today about what it means to be mobility impaired or paralyzed in a disaster situation. In my case, I've got a spinal cord injury. 11 years ago, motorcycle accident. I'm what they call a T4, T5 paraplegic. From here up, from above my chest up, everything works. Everything below that doesn't work. So it's, think of it this way, it's sort of like I just haul this slab of meat wherever I go so that this top part can work. It's kind of a crude example, but that gives you kind of an idea what it's like. You're going to run into all sorts of mobility impaired people in a disaster situation. Believe me, it's a wide range. I mean, the person could be an athlete with his leg in a cast or a splint, could be an elderly person with a cane or a walker. They might have bad knees, bad hips. They're mobility impaired. They're not agile. They're not 30 and nimble any longer. They might be paraplegics like myself in a manual wheelchair. I'm able to use my upper body, but I'm still paralyzed. I still have limitations. Or you may run into people that have polio or more of a quadriplegic in a power chair with less use of their upper body. I'm just trying to make you aware of what it means to be disabled, to see the world through our viewpoint. I respond to things, disasters, just like anyone else. I'm going to suffer anxiety. I'm going to be excitable. I'm going to be very concerned about getting out and surviving. That's not going to be unusual. What is unusual, what's different about us being the mobility impaired, is that we're really dependent on some type of device or some kind of prosthetic to get us over the situation, or we're going to be really dependent on you guiding us, helping us, providing us the assistance we need to get over the hump, to get over the hurdle, to get back in our wheelchair, or to get out of the building. But just to give you an understanding of what it means to be, in my case, a paraplegic, I want to be able to do for myself, and I will do for myself, everything that I possibly can, but there's going to be a limitation, and I'm going to need to ask for help. And when you're dealing with disabled people, you want to give them their dignity and allow them as much space to do what they need to do. And as a mobility impaired person, there's things that I'm going to think about, I'm going to respond to, that you're not going to know about. So what I'd like to do is walk you through how I respond, how I react, and try to let you see the world from my point of view. So let's say you've arrived on the situation. So much of it is just going to be common sense and going to be communication. And give the person plenty of time for communication. Take a slightly longer pause between what he or she has said to you and reply. Be slow. Slow down the speed of the conversation. Give that person an opportunity to think. You're really going to be setting the tone. They're going to be excited, and you're going to want to try to get through and get them out of the building as quickly as possible, but avoid trying to finish their sentences. You need to hear them out. If you can, speak a little slower yourself, somewhat model the communication. when you arrive there, to the extent that you can, assess whether they were paralyzed or whether they were mobility impaired prior to the disaster or not. And if it's a result of an injury, then you need to refer to your training and think that through. If it's because they were previously disabled, well, this may help you. You're going to need to ask them what level of injury they have and what their capabilities are. Again, when you arrive, they may or may not be able to communicate with you, but look around. I mean, are there canes? Are there walkers? Do they appear to have a service dog? You know, it's not only the blind that use service animals, people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs. Dogs, those dogs are so talented. I mean, they can pick up coins on the floor, they can pick up pencils. I mean, you'd be surprised at what service dogs can do. So they're not only for the blind, people with disability, people in wheelchairs, etc., also use service dogs. And as has been mentioned earlier, the dogs may or may not have their vest on, etc. Keep in mind, a person's service animal, it's not a pet, so don't try to pet it, don't feed it, don't play with it. It's a working animal. You want to ask if you can interact with a dog. It's always ask the owner, and they will instruct you, they will tell you what the dog is capable of. The other thing you need to be mindful of is, yes, it is an animal, and it is going to need to relieve itself, either at this point in time or somewhere down the road in the evacuation center. So just be mindful. The dog is going to have its needs as well. But look around. Is there a manual wheelchair? Is there a power wheelchair? The power wheelchairs are heavy. They're going to be awkward trying to get them out of the building. But I'm telling you, to the extent that you can take any of that paraphernalia with them, it's going to be critical to their success surviving the disaster. Those things are difficult to replace. And when I talk about apparatus and equipment, I want you to keep in mind things like the walker, the cane, my wheelchair, etc. Those are really critical parts for me. That's really an important aspect of my existence. So when you arrive and there's a disaster and you think, well, obviously we got to get the person out of there alive. That's the most critical thing. But don't discount the chair as if that were, oh, well, it's just furniture. He can buy another one. We got to get him out of here alive. True, you got to get him out alive, but it's a big deal. And so you haul me outside of the building, prop me up against a tree or something. Okay, great, I survived the fire, but what's the rest of my day going to be like? What's the rest of my week, the month? I mean, if you've not delivered me with my chair, it's going to just be that much more difficult. Really, in my case, it's essentially it's like a prosthetic. If I didn't have a leg and I had a prosthetic leg, well, you wouldn't leave that behind as if it were furniture. Wheelchairs are really a critical part of my existence, because without this wheelchair, I can't sit up, I can't move. I'm basically a jellyfish. I mean, I'm just there. So when you evacuate someone in a wheelchair, it's really critical that the chair go with them to the extent possible. Wheelchairs are not easily replaced. I mean, I don't just go down to the wheelchair store and buy one. You have to order them, and they can take months, 2-3 months to get your wheelchair back. So if you get me out of the burning building and you prop me up against a tree outside, well, that's great. You've saved my life. But I'm going to be leaning against that tree until somebody comes along and picks me up. I just want you to be mindful that a person's wheelchair is a really important part of their life. It's not furniture. It really is a prosthetic. Mind you, the cushions that people in wheelchairs sit on, they're either gel cushions or they're air cushions. What I mean by that is we'll usually have lost the sort of the fatty tissue in our buttocks, in our coccyx, those bones. Well, they'll just punch right through our flesh. So, why would you know that? Well, you wouldn't, so I'm telling you. Those cushions are really important that we sit on those. Some people, it's the same situation with their bed. They have certain bedding, because otherwise we will end up with pressure sores and structural, body damage to our tissue, our flesh, etc. So it's just something that you wouldn't have thought of. But just getting me out of there without bringing that gel cushion or that air cushion, that's a really important part. Back to the paraplegic, quadriplegic question. I want you to know that one of the things that's different about us is I don't sweat below the level of my injury. It's just part of the spinal cord injury. I can't explain that. But why that's important for you to know is that I may I may not be perspiring in a situation where I should be perspiring. Well, it's not because I'm comfortable, it's because I can't perspire. Or I may be perspiring and it's a calm situation. Why is this person perspiring? Because I do perspire above my level of injury. And what I'm explaining to you is that that's how we cool our bodies, we perspire, right? Well, the spinal cord injury person is unable to do that, so cooling his body is a really important aspect of that. Well, in other words, when we get out of here, we get to the evacuation center, I may be asking you for a wet wash rag, and that's not a luxury, that's not comfort. I need that to cool my body temperature down. Think of it this way, it's as if that slab of meat, the part of my body that doesn't work, that I haul around, well, it's going to get hot. I mean, the room temperature is 110 degrees or whatever because of the fire. Well, that slab of meat heats up, and I've got to cool it down, and I'm not going to be able to cool it down the way normal people do. I need that wet rag. I need to be able to have a mister or a spray bottle. So I want you to be aware of that. Why would you know this? And the other part of that is there's a situation called autonomic dysreflexia. I would really encourage you to look that up. But what that means is when certain things happen, if I have a impacted bowel, or if I have an injury to my limb, like I stub my toe or cut myself or injure myself, the nerve system speaks. I mean, it's upset, things aren't going well, and what ends up happening is we have a spike in our blood pressure, and I'm telling you, when it happens, it feels like your head is going to explode. It's very dangerous. I mean, essentially, when that blood pressure spikes like that, I mean, people are going to stroke out. I mean, that's not something to toy with. So there are few things that cause that to happen, but believe me, if I'm sweating, let's say it's not a bad situation, we're not in the fire any longer, and yet I'm sweating profusely, that means my nervous system is reacting to something's not right someplace, and that's the telltale sign that the autonomic dysreflexia is coming on, and that needs to be addressed. So I just want you to be aware, when you assess someone with a spinal cord injury and their bodily functions seem to be out of kilter, out of sorts, doing things that everyone else in the room isn't doing, there's probably a reason why, and you need to be mindful of that. We often take medication, and in the pandemonium it'll be, I want to get the heck out of here, this building's coming down. But pause and ask me, do I take medications? Where are my medications? Can you get those for me? Helping us collect what we need. I mean, make it clear to the person, we're not coming back. What do you need to live for the next week? Medicines, equipment, cath kits, etc. You're going to need to go to the bathroom when we get out of here. Is there anything you need specific for that? You ordinarily, why would you know? You're able-bodied, but as a paralyzed person, we're going to have this routine, this paraphernalia, these things that we're aware of, and in a normal situation, we would pack that and off we would go. So it's just a reminder that our bodies function differently, our plumbing functions differently. We call it your bowel and bladder program, or it's how you go to the bathroom, how you relieve yourself. And various people do it various different ways. But just to give you an example, the way I go to the bathroom, the way I urinate, it's through, this is what they call a closed system cath. And basically I insert this tube and it goes up my penis, through my urethra, into my bladder. This fills with urine. I then extract the tube. I take this, I tear open the top, I pour it in the toilet. But that's what it means for me to go to the bathroom. So, why would you know that? You wouldn't. But when I say, getting the paraphernalia, getting the equipment, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Or the person may have a situation where they have a catheter that's in them permanently, or a suprapubic, and they may have a leg bag that collects their urine. So, don't freak out when you're picking them up and moving them and you find these things, and you need to be cognizant of that you not unplug that plumbing. These are just little things about my daily life that the average person wouldn't know, and I wanted to try to convey to you when you arrive on scene. These are things that that I may or may not feel comfortable telling you, but you need to be cognizant of that, ask the questions, or the person may be unconscious and unable to communicate. I just wanted to make that clear. So when you can imagine now, once you've gotten them to the evacuation center, what their needs are going to be as far as privacy, or just a privacy screen, or the ability to take care of their bodily needs. It's slightly different than the average person. Again, there are bodily functions, medical things about being paralyzed that you also should be aware of, such as if I get a minor abrasion or a cut or a wound, when something scabs over, my circulation isn't what it used to be, and those wounds heal slowly. Most anyone that's had the injury for a while has at some point burned themselves. I mean, put something hot in their lap out of the microwave or spill some scalding water on them. And I've certainly done it, and I've had second, third degree burns as a result of that. So we learn about wound care. I will tell you that in my doc kit at home, I mean, I have the bandages, I have the dressing, I have the Hypofix, I have the, you buy these things from medical supply. It's not Band-Aids you get down at the drugstore, in other words. So I've got specialized dressings that I use to take care of wound care. Things like that you would want to be mindful of when you're evacuating them. Ask them if they have any, not only medicines, but things for wound care, dressings, etc. Those things. They're expensive, and you have to order them, and they come. But anyway, that's just part of my backup. It's part of what I have to take care of myself. Another consideration is I could have had some, depending on where my level of injury is, it affects my breathing, how much of my diaphragm I can use. So be mindful, about smoke inhalation or dust or debris or where you put us. We're not whining, we're not crybabies, but our needs are our abilities to cope with adverse conditions. It's not what other people's are. So be mindful if we complain about we're having trouble breathing, or we need to be sat up, or we need to be laid down, or somehow we need to be addressed. And again, the person's ability to communicate could be shock, they could be freaked out, they may not be able to speak to you for whatever reason. So perhaps they're deaf. As has been mentioned, just because I have a spinal cord injury doesn't mean I have other disabilities. I mean, I could be blind, or I could be deaf, or not be able to speak as well. So to the extent that you can find other ways to communicate, whether it's writing on the chalkboard or whatever that methodology is, but be aware of that. And if you know that, and you can convey that as you hand me off to the other handlers, to the people in the ambulance, or whatever the support staff is, any communication that you can provide them about what you know, what you've learned, what you've assessed, that's really important. In my situation, to the extent possible, if you could put me back in my wheelchair and carry me out in the wheelchair, or roll me and then lift me over the things, that would be my preference. And there's things you need to know about picking someone up in a wheelchair. It's my responsibility to tell you, because you don't know. You've never carried someone in a wheelchair. But if you grab the wheel, well, that's a joke. I mean, it's going to spin, and I'm going to dump out, and it's going to be a disaster. So any opportunity you have, maybe after this I'll demonstrate that for you, but learning how to pick me up and carry me in, it's not that difficult, but you have to know what you're doing. My responsibility to instruct people, I never take that for granted, and I never assume you know how to do this. My responsibility is to instruct. Grab it here, grab it there, let's lift, let's go, let's be coordinated. Any experience you can have addressing a wheelchair, seeing what a manual chair looks like and what it means to pick someone up in there, it's a skill set you should develop. You should know how to do that. I'm just telling you that carrying somebody in a wheelchair there's a little more to it than just picking them up. And if they're cognizant, they should be able to walk you through, guide you through that. But if they're not, well, there are things, it's your responsibility to understand further damage can occur if you pick them up the wrong way and drop them. And again, the do's would be, talk directly to the person about what they need. They're going to know more about it than you are. They may be excited and not thinking clearly. So again, be calm, ask questions, walk them through, have them explain. They're usually more than happy to do that. If you're unsure about something, ask, don't assume. There's a lot about mobility impaired and paralysis that they've learned to cope with. They've figured things out that you're not going to know. With just a simple question, you can make their life so much easier. I mean, if I get out of here without some critical missing link, my whole world can come crashing down pretty quickly. and remind them they're being evacuated. They may not be coming back for a considerable period of time, maybe a week, maybe a day, maybe ever, and they need to be made aware of that, so they pack and they carry out with them what they're going to need. I'm weather sensitive. Like I said earlier, I can't get too hot or too cold because I can't control my body temperature. So what I wear, the clothing that I take out of here, that's going to be important. I mean, it's not just a luxury. It's not about vanity and how I look. No, the way I dress and the way I take care of my body they're things that I figured out and they're needs that I'm going to have, and a change of clothes is really important. It's not just that you're going to have to wear the clothes for a few days and we could lose control of our bowel and bladder, and then you can imagine that's not a comfortable situation. And again, to the extent that I can get out of here on my own steam, I would rather do that. If you can clear me a path and roll me out in my chair, that's going to be the best situation. Carrying me is fraught with danger. I would rather not do that. To the extent that I can leave here in my chair, that's the best. And anything beyond that is going to be, you're going to forget something, you're going to leave something behind. It's just keeping me intact with my chair and my support equipment. I can't impress with you how important that is. Again, the part about people's personal privacy, you don't want to touch people without asking. Just because I'm paralyzed doesn't give you license to manhandle me or think you know what's best or potentially touch me inappropriately. Respect people's boundaries. And again, don't assume that I'm sitting up because I'm paralyzed that I can sit up. It really, people's level of injury, it's all where on the spinal column their injury occurs. The lower down it is, the more torso control they have, the more ability they have. But just because I'm sitting up, don't assume that when you take me out of this chair, I'm going to be able to still sit up. So we have our limitations, and you're going to figure that out as you go. Don't treat them as invalids. Don't offer them unsolicited aid. As I said earlier, if you're able-bodied, you don't want somebody feeding you, right? That takes away your dignity. But hey, both your arms are in a splint. You're not going to mind somebody feeding you at all. Well, it's the same way. I want to be able to take care of myself to the extent I can. I don't want you to do for me that which I can do. And you'll figure that out as it goes. I just want you to be aware of the psychology of what it is to be paralyzed. You do have control. You do have your dignity. You're just going to need some assistance. And again, when they're reacting, when their body is physically, whether they're sweating and they shouldn't be, or they're not sweating and they should be, there's a reason for that, and that's not good. I mean, something is going on internally, physiologically, that puts them at risk. As I mentioned, if you get a chance to look up that term, autonomic dysreflexia, you'll get a really good understanding about when that sympathetic nervous system is askew because they've been burned or they've been cut or they have an impacted bowel or whatever the problem is, and that blood pressure spikes, they're going to sweat and you're going to know they're not well. Their head is going to feel like it's going to explode, and that needs to be addressed right away. I believe I've tried to cover the wide gamut for you to understand. Just to recap, the world's getting older. There are going to be more and more mobility impaired people. We're similar to other people. We're going to have anxiety. We're going to need reassurance. We're going to need communication, and we're going to need some physical assistance. I just want people to be aware, being paralyzed and being in a wheelchair, it's more than they just took your dance card away. It's more than you're just going through life sitting down. And you need to give us an opportunity to think things through, take what we need, understand sort of how our physiology works. And the bowel and bladder is a really important part. Our medications are important. And again, the chairs, the prosthetics that we have, that's a huge part of how we get through our everyday life. And they're not simple to replace. But believe me, don't underestimate us. When I got hurt and I returned to work, my boss came by my desk and said, well, you know, Brian, FDR was able to fight a war from a wheelchair. You ought to be able to do this job. Point being that we're disabled, but we have abilities. You just need to walk us through what our options are.